what's some key advice that you would give to other educators or the school system as a whole to create less of an environment where advocacy is absolutely necessary? What I mean by that is, what are some recommendations that you would provide to say, you know what, this is how we could do better as a school system?
To the system?
Yeah,
like to the
education system, to the school itself.
I think that my experience in the Ottawa Carleton District School Board has been that we're moving consistently in the direction of making it better. So many of the things we're doing, we just have to keep doing them, do them more consistently, do them more widely, do them more deeply. And that would be, in addition to the MLOs, we're solving these problems now, but we need many more teachers from diverse backgrounds with diverse experience in the system. We still need students to see themselves reflected in the people who are teaching them. That's huge. We need more of those educators from diverse backgrounds with diverse experience in positions of authority, like in administration, in educational administration. Again, we've made progress in that, but we still have a way to go. I don't believe anywhere near reflect the general population of Ottawa in the composition of the teaching staff or the educational administrative staff. We don't anywhere near reflect that yet, right? So those are some of the ways that the system needs to, can continue to improve. I think that giving room for more facilitated dialogue between communities and the system. Like, it's one thing to come in and advocate individually for your child, but in communities there's strength. And when individual parents go into the principal's office or the guidance office to deal, it's a big system and it's intimidating. And when communities get together and talk about the needs that they're feeling as families and for their children, and that they can be met with respect and equality across the table, to have roundtable discussions with educational administrators and teachers in a way that is really fair and open, as opposed to a sense that, and I'm not saying that this happens now, but I have seen it happen, right? That, we know the system, English is our first language, we know how this works, let us help you. And sometimes parents are coming from places where they've been very empowered and they're very smart and they're very savvy. And for all the reasons that immigrants and refugee adults come here and don't have access to the same jobs and education, they end up, in terms of a kind of social capital status, lower. And so they sit across that table to come and talk about one of the things that's most important to them in their lives, which is their children's future. But they're not met. Sometimes they're not met on the same ground. They're condescended to, or they're not spoken to with the level of, I don't know what to say, mutuality.
Yeah, I think you put it perfectly. Just like the lower social capital because of many different reasons.
It's already intimidating enough to have come here and walk into this building and you don't know how anything works and you don't understand some of the language on the signs. And so it's so important to have school personnel, whoever they are, be really proactive and forthcoming with what you need to know, for example. Like, I've seen examples of parents coming in and a school principal taking notes. And there's just a kind of body language that I'm in charge, I'm the authority. And I've seen imperfect communication happen. I remember one specific case, sometimes the story illustrates a lot, where there was a father was called in to the principal to meet about some behavior of that father's child. And I knew that child, I taught that child, and that child was suspended for something that I knew was not the case. I mean, that was a miscarriage of justice, right? And that child knew it, and that child got very angry about it. And I said, look, there are ways to redress this in the system. Let me show you how you do this. There's a grievance process. And he said I thought this is an opportunity to teach a young child who was a refugee when he first came, that there's a process. Let's learn how to navigate this process so that you can redress or appeal a verdict, right? And so he was open to it. So he went home and talked to his dad, and I followed up with him the next day, and I said, well, my dad doesn't think I should do it. He's afraid that there'll be repercussions, right? His father was fairly intimidated by the entire setup and the way the principal had dealt with him. So, but then you could see, he talked to his friends, and he wanted to. Young people want justice, right? And he wanted to know that he could be empowered. They didn't have to accept this unfair verdict and the suspension and everything that went with it. And his father's sense of shame that he'd embarrassed himself and he'd embarrassed his family by getting suspended. So the dad was in for a meeting with the principal, and I met him in the parking lot afterwards. I just happened to be there. I didn't chase him down. I just happened to be in the parking lot. And I said to him, how did that go? And his English wasn't that good, and he was alone getting into his car. His English wasn't that good, and he said, he explained to me that, he said, well, it didn't go that well, but it's okay. I said, did you understand what the principal said? And as we had a little conversation, it was clear to me that what had happened in that meeting, from what he explained, was that the principal said, if this happens again, there'll be certain consequences. But he didn't understand any of what those consequences would be. And he was in that room alone. He didn't have a multicultural liaison officer. He didn't have anyone translate. He didn't have his son. I often recommend to students that they go in with their parents to parent-teacher interviews, because the kids often learn faster and they can translate, right? Sometimes people don't trust that the kids are going to tell their parents what the teacher really said. But he didn't have anybody there with him. So he was like a sitting duck for any kind of information or misinformation.
Yep.
And he walked out with a completely disempowering sense of not really understanding, just a vague sense of threat that his son better shape up or he might get kicked out. And I was just really, really, really struck at the systemic injustice of the entire setup. And that happens quite a lot.
Yeah.
It just so happens that I happened to be in the parking lot after this parent left and was able to ask and confirm that he really didn't understand anything that had gone on. And so if you ask me, what can the system do? Well, I now I see that doctors will often say to a newcomer patient, feel free to bring someone to the appointment.
Yeah.
And if someone doesn't tell you you can, you often don't. You don't know you can do it. You wouldn't think of it. You wouldn't think you needed it. Our school should be doing that.
100%.
That father should have been told, feel free to bring someone who can translate for you, or we have a multicultural liaison. We can find someone who's available with your language, your first language, to sit with you at that meeting and translate. But clearly nobody made that overture, and he didn't know he could ask for it. You don't know what you don't know. And if you're a newcomer parent, there's a lot you don't know. So what the school could do is be way more proactive in letting parents know what's available, not just in general at the beginning of the year in the parent orientation, but at a moment where an incident has happened and a parent is now nervous, upset, all of those emotional things, and they need to know that that's the point where a culturally responsive administrator or educator would say, let me tell you how this process works. Let me tell you what's available to you as support as you navigate through this very, potentially frightening or nerve-wracking experience of your child running afoul of the system.
Yep.
And I don't see that happen often enough. I don't. It's sometimes whether it's school policy or not, it often depends on which administrator they happen to be called in to meet with. And this it's like, we often say, lawyers will say, you really want your client to be with that judge in that court, because that judge, well, it's similar. You want this vice principal to have this meeting. You don't want that one. And that's just not consistently fair and impartial administration of services and justice in our system. And it still happens a lot.